I think Francesca's season will go now that we know that she is not having John's baby and that there has been a gender swap between her love interest and that Michael is now Michaela, and so they cannot have a biological child together. I think that one of the best things about the Bridgerton books and the Bridgerton show in particular is their depictions of love in all forms. And I think that has been one of the greatest strengths that it has had. They have been able to show different types of love in different ways. And I think that Francesca and Michaela's storyline is just another depiction of that. And I also think that Francesca's storyline is the only one of the Bridgerton books that lends itself to a happy queer ending in this society. Francesca has always been a more isolated character. She's been more introverted. She's kind of wanted to hide away from society from the very beginning. We barely saw her in the first 2 seasons, so when they recast her, it didn't make that much of a difference. Then she marries John and they immediately run off to Scotland to kind of disappear from society even further. And she does love her family and she does come and visit her family a lot more. And I think that is in a large part to keep her in the story so that we are actually interested in her season when it comes along. But to sum up, she wants to kind of hide away from society. She doesn't want to really engage too much. She enjoys the quiet. She enjoys isolation. And throughout this season, we saw Francesca struggle with infertility a lot. She desperately wanted a baby. However, it is unclear whether she actually wanted a baby for herself or whether she wanted it to give something to John, because she very much kept going on that she wanted to give him a baby. She wanted to give him an heir. And it was kind of hard to tell whether or not that was actually something that she wanted or whether she felt she was obliged to kind of provide that for him. And that is something I'm excited for them to explore in later seasons. I saw that a lot of people were quite upset because now that John's died, we're never going to get Francesca's infertility storyline. And I really have to question as to whether they watched this entire season with their eyes closed, because we got her infertility storyline and it can also continue beyond there. Now that John has died, Francesca's storyline has shifted. She is now a widow, and that, unfortunately, John is dead. It's very sad, but it does put her at a very powerful position. She is not going to be expected to immediately marry. This is not like a spinster. This is not like a young girl in the marriage mart. She has been married. She is now a widow. She has more agency and more power. And because she's a widow, she can do this. She can disappear from society and it would be acceptable. They could view her as grieving her husband for the rest of her life. She is a widow. And so her having a queer storyline in this way makes sense, because the only people would know would be the ones extremely close to them. And by that point, we can kind of like have storylines where we realize acceptance and we realize that love comes in all forms, and the people near to and dear to her don't mind because they understand that it's about love. And I know that a lot of people love the ending of Francesca's book because Francesca and Michael are able to have one baby together, and it's very beautiful. But I do think that there is a different issue with infertility storylines wherein there is a baby at the end of it. This is the case for a lot of women who struggle with infertility. They are able to produce, but there is also a very large facet of women who cannot, and men who also cannot. And there is not a single one of the Bridgerton books that has a storyline where they don't reproduce their own children. It is always that they end up finding a way to reproduce, and Francesca's is the only one that deals with infertility. I think it would be more interesting, arguably, to have a storyline where they find a child through another way. Weirdly said, adopt, essentially. We've seen from Sophie's storyline and Benedict's storyline that Sophie was a ward. This was more of a common practice back then, especially for people in Francesca's position, were lords and ladies who were taking in children and raising them in a castle, in like a greater level of society and taking care of them. It was the Regency equivalent of adoption in a way for the upper class. This is something that Francesca and Michaela could theoretically do together, and it would be accepted. It would be allowed. No one would look at this weirdly. People also wouldn't look at it weirdly if Francesca and Michaela were living together. They're already kind of family. Francesca married her cousin. It's not completely out of bounds for these two characters to be together for the rest of their lives. There were a lot of women who lived together and grew old together, and they were just roommates. I also think that there are some elements of Francesca's book and Michael's character in particular that I am quite happy to let go of. There is a very awful scene where Michael threatens to kind of rape Francesca, saying that he would get her pregnant as a way to force her to marry him. No, not a scene I want to see. Even if they had kept Michael as a man, I don't think they would have put that in the show because it's awful. I've mainly seen a lot of people just say that they're annoyed that they had to gender swap Michael to Michaela and that it's now a queer storyline. And why does it have to be a queer storyline? It doesn't have to be. And I would argue that there are a lot of things that the Bridgerton adaptation didn't have to do. They didn't have to introduce Queen Charlotte. She's a well-loved character now. They didn't have to give Eloise feminist ideals and radical opinions, but they did, and she is a better character for it. They didn't have to make Lady Danbury a more active character than she is now that she is in the show, but they did, and it's brilliant. They didn't have to change the ethnicities of a lot of the characters, but they did because they wanted to increase representation, because they felt that they had the opportunity to make more people feel seen by this storyline and these love stories that are inherently love stories of all forms, and everyone should feel represented by them. And so why not add a queer storyline? It's not changing the heart of Francesca's story. We've already seen a lot of it progress. We're getting more Francesca than we ever did in the books, and the idea that this is lesser than, or that this is destroying the heart of the story because they've made it queer now, is just a bit reductionist, and it reads as something that I don't think a lot of people want to be accused of, because it hurts them when they're told that you are acting a little bit homophobic in this regard. But I don't see any other way to describe it, because this storyline isn't changing that much. If anything, they could keep most of it the same. They need to change more with Colin and Penelope's story because the timelines got screwed up. This isn't the case with that. Bridgerton in itself is a love letter to love itself. That is the whole point of the show, and it is trying to make every form of love feel represented, whether that be platonic, whether that be love in your old age and renewed love and second chance, looking at Violet's character, whether that be proper friendship over decades and decades with Queen Charlotte and Lady Danbury, whether it be couples facing new challenges like with Will and Alice Mondrich. We have been introduced to new characters and to new forms of love that weren't present in the books. We have been introduced to brilliant adaptations of this. Why not have a queer love story? Why is that so bad and so hurtful for everyone to hear? I genuinely don't understand. We're not actually changing Francesca's storyline that much at all. Hers is the only one that lends itself to a happy ending for a queer storyline. Why is that so bad? If you really want to have Michael, you can go read the books. He's still there. Sure, we don't need a queer storyline, but there's a lot of things we don't need. It makes it better. That's why. This is a fantastical show. Let's enjoy it.